thing they said is that he's going to be out a few weeks. Let me pull it up right
It's
here.
the
I have it.
oblique.
Yeah, he has an oblique issue, and he didn't have any issues during spring training. So this just came basically out of the blue. He was playing. They were talking about how great of a season he's going to have, how they expected him to do so well, and then all of a sudden, this literally came out of the blue, last second, right when everyone's rosters had to get locked and everything like that. So it screws up all the fantasy players. Listen. We wish him well. He's tends to be injury prone. He had the shoulder injury. He had shoulder surgery in the past. He tends to get injured, but I mean, if you can still have him at a good value, he's still valuable. An oblique issue is usually, on average, a non-pitcher is out for 35 days. In 2019, the player was out for 35 days. So hypothetically, if he's a little below, it's only a few weeks, and he misses only 3 weeks, you're still going to get him the rest of the season because from the stats that I saw, the oblique issue does not affect speedsters. And a speedster who had it a couple of years ago in 2019, John Birdie, he had the same issue. I'm not comparing the two. I'm just comparing based on their speed, and that's what they're on the rosters usually for. But John Birdie, he missed 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks with an oblique issue. He still stole 17 bases that year. So I don't think it's going to affect him. I just think that people are upset that they paid so much or they invested so much draft capital to get him.
That's interesting to hear that it won't affect his running that much. It's funny that when I put these notes together about the show and I sent it to Scott, I was going to talk about Adalberto Mondesi even before I knew about any kind of injury. For me personally, the injury doesn't really affect my thoughts on how I would or wouldn't draft him. It's not like he's injured. Told you shouldn't have picked him. No, I wouldn't have picked him from a risk perspective. But I've heard you, Scott, on SiriusXM talking and about how you think that drafting him actually was a very worthwhile pick where he was going in the second round of this year. And I thought you gave a good explanation, and I thought we could do a little bit of a debate about Mondesi on why it was worth the investment, and maybe I'll play the devil's advocate and show the counterpoint to why I think that he was way too risky to draft at his ADP.
Sure. And this is a worthwhile discussion, no matter that he's hurt, because there will be other players who will have similar frames in the future. And you learn the best learning moments when we do this whole fantasy bit, whether it's a podcast, a radio show, or just two people talking at a bar, is you learn the most when you disagree with somebody who you respect, and you can hash out things. That's when we actually learn things. When everybody agrees on something, I don't know that anybody really learns anything. But I thought Mondesi was perfectly proactive for me, a pick in the late second round, early third round. I wasn't going to take him in the first round, certainly, and I wouldn't take him early in the second round. But I was prepared to strongly consider him middle to end of the second round. I thought he was a great third-round pick. Oddly enough, I only drafted him once. And to be really tidy about it, I drafted him on my TGFBI team where I have Eloy Jimenez in my third round. So I guess I'm shooting for last place in that league. We'll see how the rest of the team goes. But the last 2 years, first of all, let me say this about Mondesi. The first thing you have to do with Adalberto Mondesi when you consider him as a fantasy player is divorce yourself or accept one reality. He is a much more valuable player for what we do, collecting stats, than he is for the Royals, where they have to live with his career 284 OBP, his career 84 OPS plus, 16% below league average. He is not a great major league hitter by any stretch of the imagination. But he does a lot of things that we like. Now, for one thing, there's been a lot of talk about the batting average risk that he supposedly has. The last 3 years, he's at 256, 263, and 276. Now, I know those come with horrible OBPs. He was under 300 last year. He was under 300 the previous year, and just 306 is his high water mark. And that's bad. That's a bad offensive player. But the Royals think Mondesi's good. They were prepared to start him batting third, in part because he had such a great September and he's having such a great spring. There's no guarantee he would have been locked into that position. But if you look at what he's done the last 2 years, 161 games, and it's a fool's errand to project anybody to play a full season, especially a player like Mondesi, as you mentioned, who's had some injury problems in the past. But let's just, because it's convenient 161, let's just at least look at what's possible if this guy could stay on the field, what he's done the last 2 years and what essentially would be a full season, albeit, again, nobody plays really the full schedule. Over that period, although 292 OBP stinks, he's hit 260, which actually won't hurt you in fantasy. He scored 91 runs. He's hit 15 home runs. He's driven in 84 runs. And, of course, as we all know, that his calling card, he's stolen 67 bases. and attempted 82 for that matter. He's been caught 15 times. So I looked at this guy as being maybe a poor man's Trey Turner, certainly a different batting average profile. And Turner's always going to hit for a high average. Mondesi, we have to admit there's downside to his batting average. But I blanched when people said, oh, well, he's going to steal bases and do nothing else. Well, his run production's actually been really good the last couple of seasons. Staying on the field has been a problem. But the reason why I liked him in TGFBI is that the idea in TGFBI is you want to try to win the overall. And I used to be maybe 10 years ago, if we were having this discussion, I used to tell you your early pick's going to be floor driven. Don't take anybody you perceive as risky, and don't start thinking upside until the middle of the draft kicks in or the later part of the draft. But don't be letting your hair down in the second round. And I've slowly moved a little bit away from that. I still think I'm more probably of a floor drafter in the early rounds than maybe the average industry person or average NFBC person. But in the TGFBI, I said, I'm just going to take a swing because I think if Mondesi can stay on the field, I think he could return first-round value with an average that is probably going to be better than people expect. And he's not a zero in the power categories. He's not Malik Smith. And so somebody might say, well, if you draft him, you're going to make up power elsewhere. Well, I expected double-digit home runs from him. It's not that different than Trey Turner, who probably is going to hit between 15 and 20 home runs. Mondesi is a little less power than that. But I don't hear anybody who drafts Trey Turner and bemoans the fact, oh, no, I'm really screwed in power. You have the rest of your draft to try to figure that out. I thought he was an interesting upside play in the second round, or if you're lucky enough in the third round, admitting that his floor was a lot lower than other players. And I'll just mention one other thing in his favor. He's an outstanding defender. So even if he got off to a poor start, his excellent defense would probably keep him in the lineup.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think maybe the reason why I'm a little bit more sour on him is that I still believe in the floor argument that you need to have players with a higher floor. But here's my deal with him, and it's really about risk, and it's not just about Mondesi. I want to talk a little bit about pricing of risk in general. The number one rule, I'm in business, I'm in finance, I'm an actuary, as most people know. The number one rule of business is the greater the risk, the greater the expected return needed. Now, I didn't say that it's the greater the upside needed. I said it's the greater the expectation. You have to predict if a player or in business, if an investment is risky, you need to expect a better return. Not just say, well, I can make $1 million on this. You should be expecting a bigger return. When you play the stock market, the whole idea is you want to buy assets under their value, and you want to manage aggregate risk in your portfolio. Fantasy baseball is not exactly the same, but by and large, a lot of these rules do apply. And just to talk about risk and about projections, when you look at a projection, the question is what risk is already baked in. Like if you run an auction calculator and you come up with a price, and for the ATC projections, he comes up as the 25th best player. Okay, if you run that, the question is what is baked in it. I think health risk is somewhat baked in, right? If you're projecting fewer at-bats for a player because you think he might miss time, that's one way. I mean, ATC's projected Mondesi for 537 at-bats. That's not exactly a full season. That's giving the some probability to the outcome of him getting injured, right? And even with that, he's projected at 52 stolen bases, which is a fantastic rate. But with that, it's not taking into account all the risks. There is process risk. Process risk is where, because there is a finite number of games, and because anything can happen in a 162-game season, the outcomes aren't always going to be his true talent level. Mondesi is one of the most variable players. We can see outcomes, as you mentioned, in the first round, but he can also be a 20th round player if he misses time or if he just decides not to steal bases. I mean, Rob Silver made the argument that if in order for him to keep up this stolen base pace, he has to actually do things that most even good base stealers don't even do. And that is a risk which could just take him out of that. But it's more than just that in terms of pricing. Even though you get a value for what your projections say, it doesn't take into account two other risks. There's parameter risk, and there's also categorical risk. the parameter risk is where you just don't really know what his true expectation is. And when I'm doing ATC projections, I'm looking at a lot of different projections. I have some projections that project him at a 253 batting average, and some predict him at a 265. Some people have him projected for 40 stolen bases, and some over 60. Some people have 10 homers. Some people have 24 homers. There's a lot of variance in what projection systems think. And with that comes parameter risk that we just don't know his true reality. I mean, think about it. He was going to bat third, but what if he batted first? What if he didn't do so well like last year and they moved him to ninth in the lineup? Well, that makes a really big difference in his true talent for playing games. So if you look at that, and ATC has a measure of measuring risk, a parameter risk, it's one of the highest parameter risks there is. But there's also categorical risk. It's the risk of him missing, if he misses time, how it would affect your category balance, how it would affect your overall value of your rotisserie league, because, if you all of a sudden drop in stolen bases, and it's a huge drop for Mondesi, that really cuts a lot of points, more so than some other second rounders who are being drafted at that same level. So because of that, if you do some risk adjusted type pricing, I didn't find him to be the 25th best player. I found it to be closer to the 40th best player when you account for other risks which aren't in their projections. So be that as it may, I might have taken him in the 4th round, but nowhere near the 2nd round. I think the risk is way, way too great for him. And yes, he did get injured. That's not the reason why I wouldn't have taken him. It's the possibility of him getting injured. And, of course, it did come to fruition for at least a month or so. And any response to that?
I mean, it's very well reasoned, very well argued. I mean, it's no doubt. Your actuary background is always easy to see when you discuss this stuff. That's why I enjoy your podcast so much. At the times you've been on Patrick Davitt's podcast, it's just excellent because it's such a smart way to approach it. It's funny. I also had a flash that when you were talking about Mondesi, I thought about a player who reminds me a lot of Mondesi, even though his tier was much different this year. I think of somebody like Byron Buxton, who's a lot like Mondesi in a case where there are some people who just don't believe that he's a good baseball player, that he's a good hitter. He strikes out too much. Last year he had 2 walks in the whole season. I know it was a truncated season and he missed some time, but still 2 walks is a tiny amount. And I was very encouraged. It's funny, I was not really proactive on Buxton, but in one league that I run with my friend Scott Gleason, a keeper league, there's this portion of, there's like a pre-draft before the actual draft where you can pick players who were previously owned, who have different prices and all this stuff. And we had an option to pick up on Buxton if we wanted it. If I had to make the decision, I probably would have said no. But my partner really argued for Buxton. He wanted to have him. And, when you're in a partnership, sometimes, you just have to say, okay, you're passionate about this. I'm going to let you make the choice. And one game, don't know that one game is ever going to mean that much. But not only did Buxton hit a home run on opening day, but he stole a base after stealing all of 2 bases last year. And he walked twice after walking twice all of 2 times last year. And let me just say, for one day, I was really happy that we have Byron Buxton. I used to be the number 1 prospect in baseball, another guy who's always going to have a job because he's excellent in defense. But nobody would be surprised if Byron Buxton was hitting 192 on May 1st. There's a lot of holes in his swing, and he's had some horrendous slumps during his career. I'm just curious. I'm not trying to bait and switch or flip the argument. I'm just curious, and obviously the price was a lot different. How did you approach Buxton this year?
Yeah, I mean, Buxton to me had a much lower value than what the market was going for, and he, just as he said, he had a lot of the parameter risk. He did not have as much categorical risk though as Mondesi. I mean, he is not I see him more as a power hitter now than a stolen base hitter. And if you think about that, other than batting average, which it could be lower later in the draft, he's pretty even across categories. He comes out in the ATC projections as close to an average runs, close to an average RBIs player, low batting average, but a plus in homers and a plus in stolen bases. So he fits a profile of a team better. So I would not be opposed to taking him, but I generally had other outfielders I was interested in at the same price, and so I don't find him on my team.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, if not for my partner, I would be out on Buxton completely. And look, let's be realistic. I mean, after his walk rate last year, it's not like anybody expects him to have like a 12% walk rate this year. I wasn't sure what to do with the stolen bases because if a lot of the stolen base value, a lot of stolen bases in baseball are going to come from if a player's willing to do it, if he thinks it's worth the wear and tear in his body. I know that Mike Trout